I don't think isolationism started with Donald Trump. I think isolationism started with the services economy revolution in the 1980s. We were starting to get there because Labour had been so left-wing, so socialist on the economy.
It's interesting how you mentioned foreign intervention as one of the achievements of the Conservative Party, because most people perceive Conservative Party as a bit of isolationist. Hello, Jack. It's super nice to have you on my podcast. And I know you're a campaign manager for Conservative Party. What challenges do you feel like Conservative Party is going through right now? Is that there is a lack of leadership, or people have lost faith in this party over the years? Or what are the main problems to identify?
Well, look, firstly, Volodymyr, it's really nice to come on podcast. I think you're doing a great thing. And it's always good for younger people to get involved in politics and talk about the issues. And you bring up a big issue straight out the door there, which is where's the Conservative Party gone wrong? Let me start by saying I will absolutely accept and admit and be honest about the issues with the Conservative Party. But I do just want to start with a caveat. I think politics is broken across the board. And I think what you've seen in the last 6 months since Labour came to power in this country is that people were sort of lied perhaps by the Conservatives when they were in government a bit, and I do agree with that. But people were also sort of lied by Labour. Labour came in and said they would be different. They said they wouldn't have scandals. Then we heard about the Lord Alley money. Then we heard about the jobs to the civil service for political appointments into the Treasury with no scrutiny. And it's gone on, and we've heard now about Keir Starmer this week talking about grooming gangs. There's so many examples of where Labour have completely failed their own test on honesty about insolvency. It's so little time. Yeah, I'm one of the biggest critics of Labour that you will find in this country. And even I, Volodymyr, have been surprised by how quick Labour messed things up. But you are right to say that the Conservative Party were to blame quite a bit of the distrust in politics. And I think fundamentally, I wrote an article recently about this. I think the Conservative Party made 3 fundamental mistakes if we're going to draw into it. Number one, they didn't deliver enough. So there were not enough different areas in the country where after 14 years of us being in power, initially with the Lib Dems, but most of the time on our own, that people could look at and say the country is better. I think there were a couple. I think the country is a safer place because of this Conservative government. I think they've dealt with some of the defence situations very well, whether that was the Syrian civil war when we got involved in 2013, whether that was withdrawing from Afghanistan, which I think was the right decision, or whether that was the bombing in Syria that we did with Trump and Macron under Theresa May in 2017, or whether that was the response that we led the way. We were the pioneers of the world on the Ukraine crisis when that came up in the 2020s. So this Conservative government has been good on foreign policy. I think they've been good on education. I think we've seen last night a shambolic Labour government overturning educational reforms that took us from the sort of 20s to the 10s in science and reading and math. And what's happened in Labour-run Wales? They've gone backwards. They dropped down the ranking tables in the same time that we've gone up in England. So they were good on education. And then I think they were good on employment. Or the millions more people employed in this country than we had in 2010. We had an unemployment rate back then about 8.6%. It's about 4.5 today. So employment is another success. But quite rightly, people will say, what else? And that's where we struggle. And on a number of the key issues, and I think if I was to pick a couple of them, immigration, tax rates, and the NHS would be the 3 that would spring to mind, we didn't do it. We didn't do what we said. We said we would reform social care under Johnson. We didn't achieve it, or we didn't achieve it in a substantial enough way for people to feel that the NHS got better. We said we cut immigration, it's gone up, and we said that we were a low tax party and we pushed it to the highest tax rates in 75 years, although it's ironic of Keir Starmer to criticise for that.
Yeah.
After that, because they've gone ahead and raised taxes. They've raised them even more. So we didn't achieve everything. So that's issue 1. We didn't deliver enough. Number 2, we weren't conservative enough. We're a conservative party. We've got to appeal to small C conservatives, ordinary voters, cultural conservatives, people across the country that believe in a small state, low taxes, protecting British interests, the nation state before globalism. We didn't deliver on any of those priorities. And I think you look, for example, our net zero response. Was it a conservative response? We used the state. We enforced mandates on electric cars and on boilers. And only Sunak, towards the end of our time, pushed back a bit on that. We should have had a free market conservative response to climate change. And I'm sure we'll come on to talk about that. And then there was too much infighting. Number 3, there was way too much infighting. 5 different prime ministers, 16 housing ministers, I believe, constant infighting, constant resignations, leadership challenges. we just look like a broken party that ran out of ideas. And that often happens, I think, once you get past about 10 years in government. So we didn't deliver enough, we weren't conservative enough, and there was too much infighting. And that was why the country rightly kicked us out. And we've got to change all those things if we want to get back in.
It's interesting how you mention foreign intervention as one of the achievements of the Conservative Party, because most people perceive Conservative Party as a bit of isolationist policy.
So I think that the global right is going through a debate at the moment about how much do we want to get involved in intervention and conflict around the world. I've always believed that the conservative approach is to stand up for people that we are allies with, but it is not to appease our enemies. And I'll give you some examples of how I think that plays out. I think Ukraine is where we first go. There was pretty much a consensus in Britain that we needed to help Ukraine. Ukraine was a sovereign, democratic nation. It was invaded illegally by a Russian government, tyrannical Russian government. And if we didn't get involved, we didn't stand up and say, no, you are not coming any further into Europe to Vladimir Putin, then he would have continued his march. He would have gone invaded other Eastern European countries who were in NATO, and then we would have had a full-blown war. I think one of them right not in there.
It's interesting, right? Would he?
Well, I believe he would. I think we made a mistake in Ukraine quite a few years ago. I think we made two, actually. We should have brought them into NATO much earlier. Possibly the EU, that's the path we want to go down. Just because I don't support the EU in Britain doesn't mean I don't think the EU has value for countries in Eastern Europe. But we also made a mistake when we allowed the Crimean situation to play out, and I think it's 2014. And I think we should have stood up stronger against Putin then. And I think that enfranchised him to believe he could do this in Ukraine. And I think a similar thing could have played out if we had done that with Ukraine. If we allowed him to take Ukraine, it would have enfranchised him to further get involved in Finland or Latvia or Estonia, other countries in the region. So I think we did finally put our foot down. I think that's worked. Have we got the outcome I would have wanted in Ukraine? No. Have we spent probably more money than we ideally would have wanted to? Yes. That doesn't mean I wouldn't have spent it, but we can accept that's a lot of money that we've spent on the situation. But we have, I think, shown Putin that this has backfired. It's had a huge economic cost to Russia, huge cost of life to Russia as well. And he fundamentally hasn't been able to achieve the objectives we thought. So that's an example of good foreign intervention. You can also have foreign intervention that's good where we don't actually get so involved financially or put troops, when we didn't put troops in Ukraine. The bombings in Syria, for example, where we bombed what we thought were chemical weapon sites. We did that in 2017. We didn't get the votes for it in 2013 that I would have liked to see, and Labour put up some opposition to that. I think that was wrong. But we did get the support or after it happened in 2017. I think Theresa May was right to do that. Where I maybe have more of an objection to that foreign intervention is on the troop movement point. So I think it was a massive mistake in hindsight to go into Iraq. It's easy to say that now when we see the situation. The only person that knew, of course, at the time that there wasn't chemical weapons was Tony Blair out of the candle. The people that were pushing for that intervention, they were completely wrong. They should hold their hands up in shame. But I just don't think we should be pushing British troops into wars and escalating conflict. So I think the right needs to balance itself between supporting intervention where it's beneficial to British interests, because we'll always put British interests first in the Conservative Party, or at least we should, but not putting troops on the ground. I think that's a provocation that we don't need.
What's British interest, you think, was in terms of giving Ukraine more support? Is that more of an image move, or is that we would like to fight Russia more?
Well, but I don't think it was we want to fight Russia, because if we wanted to fight Russia, we would have put troops on the ground.
Yeah.
We would have put troops on the ground. We would have tried to encircle Kiev and stopped Russia coming in. I don't think we want to fight with a nuclear nation. I don't think anybody's quite crazy enough to want that. What I do think it was sending a message about the democracy in Europe and the fact that we want to support democracy in Europe, and sending a message to Russia that they may be able to wrangle into bed with North Korea and China, but they're not going to be able to take sovereignty away from European countries. I think that is an important message to send.
There are two sides of this coin, though. We can see that Ukraine has remained independent, even though in the beginning of the war, very few people thought that Ukraine will be able to withstand all of the challenges of the war, having been received not enough weapons at the start of the war. But then, obviously, we managed to, because I'm Ukrainian myself, we managed to defend our country well. But at the same time, we can see that currently Russia has more troops, more military potential, and Europe, as well as the West, is starting to refuse us a lot of support. And countries like Estonia was been spending about 90%, I think, was the number of their GDP on our military. They just don't have the possibility to spend even more. And the US with Trump might refuse a bit of support. Where do you think we're heading with this? How is the situation with the Ukrainian war?
Well, let me touch on Europe, then I'll come to the US because the US is a very special case. Look, I think Europe has been largely supportive, in Britain in particular, but you're also right to point out the Eastern European nations. It's not surprising they put more money in. They've got more at stake. Their security is more threatened. Poland is only good examples. I think other Western countries like the French and the Germans could do more economically and to help the Ukraine fight. But I also may have got to understand that European countries are struggling economically themselves. We're going to difficult economic times. We're still building out of COVID. The supply chain issues that have been caused by the Russian and Ukraine war, the gas shortages because Russia pulled their oil pipelines off the back of the economic sanction, which was the right thing to do, but had a knock-on effect. So Europe is struggling, and they're balancing their own financial situation with their political desire to help Ukraine. I think it's a fairly fair balance that we've come to. There'll be people that think we should put more money into Ukraine. There'll be people that think we should put less money in. Now, the US is very interesting. They've got a lot of money. We must remember the US has put far more money than anybody else into the Ukraine conflict. That's not surprising because the US has far more money.
Although that's about less than 1% of their.
It may be less than GDP, but we have got to remember that when Ukraine gets the money, it doesn't matter what percentage of someone's GDP is. It's about what that financial value is and how many weapons you can buy from that. So we have got to respect the US on that. There's obviously a lot more political tension there. That isolationism that we talked about, this new conservative movement on the right taking precedence in. I think it came from the US. I think it's most prominent in the US. And I think the Make America Great Again movement in itself is very isolationist. It believed in America first. That's its agenda. It's its name. And unless it can see direct impacts to US security, it's not going to be likely to support foreign conflict. I say that in inverted commas because they do have a different position on Israel. And I always think they're really interesting that they're happy to draw that line on Israel. Not that I disagree with them supporting Israel. I completely understand why the US would do that, but it is interesting that that doesn't seem to fit into the isolationism. But fundamentally, I think you will see under a Trump administration a rowing back of support, but I don't think we'll see a complete end to support. And Trump is obviously going to push quite hard for a peace deal. And actually, I think he's sort of baited both the Ukrainian and Russian leaders into looking at that because Trump's unpredictability is actually an advantage for him in this field. Nobody quite knows what he's going to do next, which means you want to get a deal on good terms before he does something wacko. And actually, that might help this conflict. I don't know. Let's see where it goes. But I don't think he'll completely cut off support for Ukraine.
Obviously, this kind of isolationist movement came from America, from Trump administration. And do you think it has transitioned to England with Nigel Farage attempting to run for a prime minister again and again, and his party gaining popularity, even more and more people over time joining reform, and some of the people transitioning from conservative to reform? Do you think that's a big threat to conservative party, especially?
Well, there's two parts to that. The first part is on isolation, and the second part is on the reform. So I'll take them one in turn. On isolationism, I don't think isolationism started with Donald Trump. I think isolationism started with the services economy revolution in the 1980s. What we saw was towns, industrial towns that for 100 years, dating back to the Victorian era and the Civil War in America, industrial towns have been the heartland of economic growth. The North in the Civil War, or the North in the UK, the Manchester and cities like that with the Industrial Revolution. That was where the jobs was. That was where the money was. That was where the opportunity for work was. And when we hit the services economy revolution, and when industrial jobs stopped paying what they used to pay, people fled to these industrial towns, fled to the city to work long hours in office jobs in front of computers, making money on a services and financial basis. And what that meant was people forgot about those towns. They forgot about the people that were still living there, the older people that didn't really have the time or hadn't had the education opportunity to learn these IT skills, to give them an opportunity to engage in those services jobs. And these towns crumbled, and kids were born and would move out to go to university and would never come back. And nobody remembered the towns that held our country up for 100 years. And those people started to ask themselves, what good is money going abroad when I need money here? People in power in big cities thought we had the money to spend elsewhere because they were financially stable. They didn't realize the geographical inequality that had been caused by the services revolution. Now, don't mistake me, the service revolution was a great thing. It improved living standards. It made it safer to work with less people in pits and industrial jobs. but it left people behind that have never been represented. And that is the target voter today. Those are the voters that decide elections. They decide who they think is representing them. And that kind of nicely links me on to that second point, because they are the people that are going to reform. Look, I don't think Nigel Farage will be the next Prime Minister. The reason I don't think he'll be the next Prime Minister is we have a first past the post system, and I don't think the Reform are going to be the biggest party in 326 of the 650 seats. I think he could be the kingmaker, though, of the next election. I think he could have a big say in who does govern by his strategy. If I was advising Reform, they need to stop spending all their time attacking the Conservatives. You said people were defecting from the Conservatives. A few have. Andrew Jenkins, Tim Montgomery, haven't had any current MPs defect. But the big thing is actually Labour voters going to Reform. Voters that maybe voted Conservative in 2019, they like Boris Johnson, they wanted to get Brexit done, they believed in levelling up. They felt the Conservatives failed on all three of those things, ditching Boris, not delivering Brexit as they wanted it, and not levelling up. They went to vote Labour because Labour said they would cut your energy bills. Labour said they would protect the winter fuel payments. Labour said they were on the side of farmers. Labour said it'd be easy to get an NHS appointment. And Labour said they would cut the scandal and cut the sleaze. They've done the opposite on all five of those things. Labour have scrapped the winter fuel payments, leaving freezing pensioners to die. Just last night, we nearly ran out of electricity in our system because Labour haven't cut your energy bills. They made them more expensive. And Ed Miliband's radical green agenda is killing our energy system. And Labour have had so much sleaze, so much scandal, and they've wrecked the economy. So they've lost trust with Labour as well. And now they're turning to Reform. But this is the easy bit for Reform. They can sit at this election and years out still and say the establishment is evil and the system is broken. I happen to agree on both of those points. I just don't think Reform are the solution to it. They haven't got ideas. They ran a manifesto last time that promised about £84 million of spending and £55 million in tax cuts. They don't have an economy that can afford to do that. So where are the Reform ideas? They're not there. They're right about immigration. We need to cut immigration, but they don't have the solutions. And I think some voters will realise that. But what I think you'll really see at the next election, if you want one prediction from me, is voters will start learning properly how first past the post works. And what they'll start to learn is that you can only vote if you want to vote for the next MP, for one of the few candidates that actually have a chance of winning. And I think you will see Conservatives do better in the areas where they have a chance of taking an MP of the Lib Dem, or particularly Labour. I think Reform will do well where the Conservatives aren't so popular. And I think we will almost certainly not have a majority government next time. It'll be whether the Labour and the Lib Dems can form a government or whether Conservatives will Reform.
I think you're certainly right about small town voters in terms of isolationism. And there was a big drive behind the Trump campaign. A lot of people from Kansas and kind of small states voting for Trump. But we can also see that due to this innovative change and due to the development of AI, these people will be left behind even more over time. With technology developing, technology will potentially be able to substitute some of the people working in farms and etc. So is that a point worth raising for Conservative Party? Is that something that parties like Reform are going to be able to exploit to their advantage?
Well, I haven't seen Reform. That's not going to continue. I haven't seen Reform exploiting the AI revolution point. I think it's a good point. I mean, let's just firstly put facts out on AI. Rishi Sunak ran one of the biggest ever world conferences on AI, invited people like Elon Musk over to this country. He's quite a prominent player in politics these days. Slightly less controversial when he came to that conference. Labour scrapped our AI services budget. So Labour have given up on AI. AI is going to be an incredibly important part of the future. I don't think it will remove all the jobs, because I think there are jobs where humans have to make decisions. And AI is not at the moment in a position where it can make a rational decision, but it can't make a decision based on emotion. And sometimes we need that in life. But let me say this. I do think technology is very important to do jobs. But I think that is that point, really. You know, I think back to COVID, when we all worked from home. You know, left-wing people tell you that working from home is great. So they love being at home in their big mansions in southeast England or in London, all the space and all the time in the world, and there's no pressure on life. Those funny people that when you ask them, they say lockdown was great. They say lockdown was a wonderful time. It was sunny, we were outside, had a lovely time. But when you speak to people in poorer areas of the country, they say lockdown was crap. And why do they say that? Because it was their kid that had to go out of his house and sit in McDonald's and do lessons from home. Their kid, whose school was always off because we had a 5-tiered system, and this was our government, I know, that punished northern areas. Their kid, who was off because the teachers at that not so good school, because we don't have enough grammar schools that are achievable for working class kids, couldn't be bothered to turn up and teach us the lessons. And their kids who didn't have access to healthcare and mental health services, so they thought about killing themselves. I knew people who took their own lives during COVID. Our generation was decimated by a pandemic and lockdown that was too heavily enforced on people's lives. But you couldn't say those sort of things. You couldn't push back against the establishment narrative that lockdown was essential, mask wearing was essential, and once you got a vaccine, you wouldn't be able to spread the virus. None of that was true.
Yeah.
Did we need an initial lockdown? Of course we did. We had to stop a virus that we had no way of protecting. But once we had the vaccine, once we saved the critical older people whose lives were in danger, we should have come out of lockdown for good. And we should never have closed schools, wrecking kids' lives forever. Teacher-assessed grades that will forever mean classes like mine will have grades that are not treated as seriously. And we should have an inquiry that is not politically biased, that actually looks into young kids who took their own lives because they saw no future in a country that should always deliver a future. Britain is the best country in the world, and the idea that young people were trapped in their own homes with no way of believing that Britain could deliver for them is one of the most shameful things I've ever seen.
And the lockdown was a big problem to the economy as well.
It was a huge problem. We're still recovering from it. But this is why I do want to pay the former Prime Minister some respect. Rishi Sunak didn't get everything right. But he flew back in September of, I believe, 2021. And he flew back from America and conference he was at to argue against another lockdown because he knew the dangers that we'd be putting ourselves into if we had another lockdown. And we've got to respect that. If we'd had a third lockdown, it'd been even worse. And Labour wanted that lockdown. So I don't want to hash out all the arguments of COVID again, but lockdowns were critical to our economy. And what happened is we spent too much money because we were locked down for too long, and then we had to pay it back. And the problem with the voters, I laugh for voters, but the problem with the voters, they always want the money when we give it out, but they never want the cuts that we then have to enact to pay back the money. We drive up debt, and borrowing becomes more expensive, as it has today for those following the news, that we now have borrowing at the most expensive rate since 2008, when Labour were also in power.
In terms of tax policies that you have already criticized in our podcast, how different do you think the Conservative Party policies on that are? Because nowadays, of course, Keir Starmer is getting criticized mainly on that for raising taxes, etc. Do you think Conservatives would be able to do a better job with current leader?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, firstly, respect to Kemi. I think that she is a great Conservative voice, and I think she's going to do a great job at delivering our message.
A bit of culture warrior.
Yeah, she's good on those issues as well. She was talking yesterday about how she fought so hard to close the Tavistock Centre, where criminally young girls were having mutilation towards their own bodies at an underage. That was shocking what happened there. Horrific cover-up, and cover-up is a big topic at the moment because we're talking about how Pakistani grooming gangs were able to get away with a cover-up where the police service decided that we couldn't have a go, then we couldn't hold them to account because they were not white. That's a shocking thing as well. But yes, Kemi has stood up strongly on what people like to call the culture issues. For me, it's called common sense. Understanding there are two genders, not 72. The people are male or female, not astra or pangender, whatever the new wacky terms are that are out today. That's common sense. Everybody across the country understands it. You know, you come down to East Devon, where I'm from, the great village of Cyprian, you talk about pangender, and people go, pan what? They don't understand what you're talking about. It's absolute nonsense. We need to get back to common sense. I always think Robert Jenry, who ran for leader, is a great man. He's speaking hard on all of these issues like the grooming gangs at the moment, and tremendous respect to the campaign that he fought, which I thought was excellent as well. But yeah, I think we've got leadership that is actually going to stand up for Conservative values now. That's a long ramble, but back to your question, which is actually about tax policy. Yeah, look, I'd be the first to say that there was not enough blue water. We always talk about blue water in politics. I don't just say blue because it's Tory. We need that differentiation between the two parties. It's good for voters to understand the different agendas the parties are offering. And if we spoke to a lot of voters at the last election, they didn't understand the difference between the Conservatives and Labour.
It has been very similar.
It's been very similar. But we're starting to get there because Labour have been so left-wing, so socialist on the economy, that we're starting to understand the difference between the parties. And let me give you some common sense examples. Labour believe pensioners should freeze to death. that they should have their winter fuel payments cut. This after they accused us of introducing a dementia tax in the 2017 election. They said a vote for Labour was a vote to save pensions. It's actually a vote for pensions to die. They didn't do an impact assessment on winter fuel payments because they knew the danger it would leave pensioners in. Conservatives will always stand up for pensioners. You know, the problem that we have in this society today is that older people worked so hard. This is the generation of Dig for Victory. This is the generation of rationing in the Second World War. This is the generation of fleeing as young kids to the countryside, to bomb shelters, to avoid German bombs. They worked their socks off to rebuild this country from the ashes, and now it's our turn as younger people to give something back to them. They deserve a fair retirement, they deserve fair money, and they deserve their winter fuel payments. That's issue one. Two, farmers. Farmers produce our food across this country. They keep us afloat as a country. And we have introduced this sickening family farm tax, which is going to hit so many farmers across this country. Anybody with estates over, I think it's £1 million, are now going to have their land taxed. Now, Labour say this is a lot of money, but it's not, because farmers are asset rich. They're not cash rich. Many of them only make about £30,000 a year. What happens if the farmers go out of business? We can't produce as much food here. What happens if that happens? We have to import it from another country. And here's the hypocrisy. Here's the irony. Labour say they're against climate change. Then they introduce a budget that's going to make us flying more food in on gas-guzzling planes, sucking in all that carbon dioxide. They're not really on the side of climate. And then issue three, I believe truly that Conservatives do believe in cutting tax for business. When we were in government, we introduced tax cuts. Corporation tax was at a record low under the Conservatives. And we did some very good work on national insurance, a criminal second tax on work, cutting that tax. Do I want us to have done more? Yes. Should income tax come down when we financially can afford it? Of course it should. Should we stop taxing people so much when they first get into a job? Absolutely. And Reform put a good policy forward at the election. First 20,000 you earn, you shouldn't be taxed on. I liked that policy. Unfortunately, Reform didn't come up with a way to pay for it. I think we should come up with a way to pay for it, and then we should run that. I do think we need to work on the tax system, and particularly people going to apprenticeships, I think their taxes should be lower as well. So there are now some clear differences between Labour and the Conservatives on the economy, and I hope we'll continue to put common sense economic policy forward. But let's be really clear. You vote for Labour, you're voting to kill pensions because they will not be able to get through the wings that we are with fuel payment. Kill farmers' businesses, meaning we import more food from abroad, and that makes climate change worse. And kill businesses with criminal increases to inheritance tax and business contributions to national insurers. We've driven up the cost of running business, which cuts the jobs, which means it's harder to get a job in Britain. And it's never been harder than today to get a job because we are struggling as an economy. And that's not a party political point. We're just struggling for growth. Don't hammer the businesses. They create the growth.
It's great that you have mentioned Kemi Badenoch as the leader, as she, I can see, clearly differentiates herself from the traditional establishment conservatives, because over time we could see that establishment conservative for about 20 years have been not effective and proven to be not effective. And it's important, I think, that the party gets that different leadership in terms of the figure that says that she is something different, to let people know that we have a different leader now, and hence the policies are going to be different and the result is going to be different. But I was just wondering, what's your opinion on 20 years of just constant problems with Conservative Party? And this is why I think people have chosen to choose Labour, which is, yeah.
Well, I certainly think that last point is true. People did not vote for the Labour Party in the last election. They voted against the Conservative Party. Absolutely right, Vladimir. We've got to hold our hands in. So we got things wrong. Part of the reason why I want to help reform the Conservative Party going forward, no pun intended there, is that I know there are people that have tried really hard on this country. I know there are people that have been around for years and they've done a great job. But once your record gets tainted, it's very hard to untaint it. You imagine someone that's been an MP for 30 years knocks on a door. You're a voter. And they say, will you vote for me at the next election? And you go, no, I won't, because you failed by driving tax up, by driving immigration up, by driving the cost of net zero up, by driving foreign aid, which didn't help people in this country up. And you've not done anything for me. What do you say? You might be the best constituency MP in the world, and you might have personally lobbied against all those things, but you stood there, you were part of a government. The best thing the Conservative Party can do is come up with new policy that does not sound like the old policy. Reform their candidate selection process to actually allow local associations to pick the people they want, not who said shoppers want, and pick younger, new, exciting candidates, fresh off the blocks, who don't have a record they have to hide from. They can be themselves. They can say, to hell with that criticism. I didn't support any of that. I didn't vote for it. I didn't turn up at the Commons and vote for the unthinkable. I am a new Conservative with a new bold vision who's going to change the way this country is run. And I'm going to do it by putting you, the voter, back at the heart of it. You want a Britain where you can come home at night to your own home that you own, because we don't have any houses for young people today. In a country where your taxes are going on British people, where rather than putting illegal migrants up in hotels, we're putting homeless veterans. Because if people are willing to die for this country, they should be able to live in this country. That's common sense. You want a country where rural communities are protected, where farmers are put at the heart of our country. You want a country where business decides growth. Business are given the opportunity to employ people, not central government, nanny state government, putting their big hand on business, grabbing them around the neck and telling them what to do. That's the kind of country I want. That's the kind of country you want. That's the kind of country all the voters want. And we're only going to be able to sell that Conservative vision with candidates whose past voting records are not tainted and who can honestly say we've changed. Give us a chance.
Yeah, in terms of net zero, you have mentioned that that's clearly not a conservative thing to advocate for. How do you think the climate change issue and the environmental questions should be approached by the Conservative Party?
Well, let me say firstly clearly, we do want to achieve net zero. I don't want to give the wrong impression to listeners of this podcast. We do want to get there. We do want to fix our climate because we need a planet and a country to live in the future. I'm not against that. I'm not a skeptic of the climate. I'm not against achieving net zero. But there is a but. We've got to be honest about the cost. I speak to a lot of young people. About politics because I don't think young people talk about politics enough. They say they don't care about politics, and then you ask them about an issue they've got a view. To talk about politics, have your say.
Everybody has a view now.
Everyone has a view and everyone should be listened to. I always think that. I'm talking to young people about and then the first thing I say is, I'm big on the climate. I'm big on the car. I am so green. I'm honestly so green I could be a beanstalk. That's what they tell me. I don't quite say it like that. But they're so green, they tell me. And then I say, why is that? When we actually dig into it, when we're off the record, firstly, I know people say that because they think it's not cool to not say that. I've been to university. I went to the University of Exeter. And I spent 3 years saying all the uncool things, and everybody would laugh and jeer at you. And then guys would come up to you afterwards and say, you're saying what we're all really saying. But we don't want to lose our friends. We don't want to lose our opportunities in the future because we want to go work in these big office environments in establishment companies in London. And we know we're going to be really woke to live there. So people actually are more skeptical about net zero than they'd let on. But the big point I say to people, even that are for net zero, I say, okay, so you're for. So you're not going to go and fly. You're not going on holiday. You're not going abroad. Oh, no, I'm going on holiday. If I earn my own money, I have a right to go on holiday. Of course you do. It's common sense. But that flight is consuming carbon. You won't be able to do that if we achieve net zero by the timeline you want. You see, I remember the best irony, Harry and Meghan, the ultimate wokerati couple, Harry and Meghan, when they flew, do you remember, to that climate conference in Amsterdam? They flew on a private jet. They flew on a private jet to go to a climate conference. Can you get any less common sense than that? No, you can't. So the point being, people want net zero until they find out what they had to give up to get there. We need pragmatic net zero that does not hit working people. We can't push people to buy electric cars. You should come to Devon, where I'm from. There are hardly any charging points. There are loads of roads and the electric cars won't get you to your destination and back. It's not common sense for rural communities. We can't push £20,000 boilers on people when they can't afford them and the government subsidies don't help them get there. Let's achieve net zero by bringing everyone with us. But let's not stop working class families from going on their one holiday a year. You want to tax anyone, tax big business, but fly every week somewhere and then they go and preach about climate change. That's hypocritical.
In terms of your experience in the university, how you have mentioned that when you have told the class your views, you got criticized and people said, well, we actually support you, but we didn't really want to speak about that ourselves. I think that's a very important issue nowadays in the society, that people feel like they're being silenced and their opinions are not being listened to anyway. So why even express them? Do you think that has to do with education problems, or is just the system that has been old and needs to be changed?
I think it's a few things. I mean, firstly, I did have a difficult time at university from time to time. I had 2 different investigations launched into me by the university about things that I said.
What's that for?
Well, I was accused of bullying somebody because apparently I mentioned his dad's name. I mean, I didn't know that naming people was bullying. I knew apparently naming people's gender can sometimes be considered bullying, but I didn't know that naming them was. And apparently I talked about, I said that I thought the Prime Minister was, obviously not this Prime Minister, previous Prime Minister was right about Israel-Palestine. That was very dodgy. I got kicked out of the Radio Society for that.
You are supporting Israel.
I think that both Israel and Palestine have done things during this conflict that is wrong. But my fundamental premise starts from the fact that this latest outbreak of fighting started when 1,200 Israelis were brutally raped and beheaded and murdered, completely unprovocated by Hamas October 7th. Yeah, on October 7th. Do I, for example, support the Rafah bombing in the refugee camp that Israel did in response? No, I don't. I think Israel has gone too far, and I think they've actually lost some of their public support. But do I broadly support Israel's right to self-defense? Of course I do. And do I think it's appalling the anti-Semitism the Jewish people have faced it? Absolutely shocking. I saw a stat the other day that in the last year, 54% of anti-religious hate crimes in New York City have been against Jews. Jews make up nowhere near 54% of the city. That is an astonishing statistic. Why is nobody else reading that statistic? Because mainstream media don't run it. Because mainstream media are not interested in the plight of Jews. Because they're seen as dangerous, because they're seen as supporting Israel, who support the US, and of course try and support the US, can you? I think it's shocking the way the Jewish people are treated. But going back to my point about university, yeah, I started a lot of investigations and people criticizing me for my views, but I always stood up for it because I believe there'd always be somebody else in the class that thought that. But maybe they didn't have the profile I had. Maybe they didn't have the confidence I had. And that's not an arrogant point. That's just saying I wanted to be able to help people who maybe didn't want to voice their views. And I don't blame anyone on the right or on the common sense side of the issue. Because left and right doesn't really mean anything today. It's about whether you believe in a global world where we're all the same. We must all treat each other equally, and everybody must be allowed what we have, even if they haven't worked for it, even if they don't live in this country. Or you believe in a nation state. You believe in patriotism and pride in your country, and you believe in common sense ideals, views that we've held for years and we really don't need to change. And that's the debate in politics today, and I'm on the common sense side. And I applaud other people that are on the common sense side to join me as we fight back to change this country for the better. But I know there are people that support me because the campaign team that come out and held me in Hollanton and Sidmouth are largely young students who worked with me at university or work with me in political campaigns in the local area. They're passionate. They put their own time. They're not paid for it to come and help me on my political career. And I can't thank them enough because I've always believed in teams. You can't do anything on your own. Anyone that thinks they could be a leader on their own is a joke to me. You need a team of people there to help you. And the best people, the best politicians have a group of people that are willing to go to hell and back to help their guy.
Yeah, I certainly feel just similar in terms of the university I go to. Even though my university allows for a free speech to flow, I know a lot of universities in London don't allow for that to happen. And in case you mention Israel-Palestine question in some kind of color that they don't want to see, or if you mention gender, race, just sexuality, then they instantly get very furious about it, and they use the power to silence you, and they make people afraid of saying what they have to say. Do you think cancel culture in that regard has gone too far in our society?
Of course it's gone too far. Look, there are some things that people say that are dangerous. If I walked into a building tomorrow and said I'm going to blow everybody up, that's a dangerous thing to say. I would never say that, by the way, before people get the wrong idea of that. But anyone that's been enjoying me up to this point is, whoa, he's out there. I wouldn't say that. But anybody that does that, where they say something that would incite violence, that's a dangerous thing. But that word incite, like that word Hitler, or that word racism, or that word transphobic, all these words that used to mean something, nobody knows what they mean today. Why is that? Because they're misused, they're over-appropriating. I remember when I ran to be debating society president in my second year at university, and I ran on a very simple common sense agenda. I said, I want to allow more free speech. I want to vote more external speakers with controversial views. We can challenge our own thoughts. And I want the members of our society to have more ability to scrutinise the decisions our committee takes. And somebody started up a campaign called Stop the Fascist to stop me winning that election. Well, I implore people to tell me, what is fascist about?
Because apparently you're allowing everybody to speak their mindset.
And that's actually that it's... I mean, lo and behold, I thought the ones that cancelled speech were the fascists. I thought the famous fascists of the past that I can remember were the ones that used to burn books or cancel books, not allow people to read, who used to silence and suppress speech, not give people the right to say their view, who used to block people that had different opinions, not invite them onto their campus. It's ironic how the word fascism is used today, and it's far more totalitarian, the people that are cancelling speech than the people that are allowing it. But you asked a good question a moment ago. It's about why are these universities left with them? I don't feel I've answered it yet. I think it's a you have to remind me. I will get to it now. Um, I, I think it's a double-edged sword. I honestly do. I feel that it's both the educational establishment and the student population. We'll take them in turn. Educational establishment is perhaps the more obvious one. They're part of left-wing unions who helped them go on a strike as much as they were. I remember in my second year, I think it was, where there was honestly a term, I think it was the Easter term, where the lecturers were more on strike than off strike. And they're supposedly on strike because they want more pay. Well, maybe if you turned up a few more times and taught my lectures, I'd be more likely to believe that you should have more pay. That's a separate point, but that does wind me up. Look, I'm sympathetic to anyone that feels that they work hard and they should have more money. But if you're asking me, am I going to pay university lecturers who got to sit at home for the entirety of COVID or NHS frontline workers more? It's NHS frontline workers every single day because they put themselves in harm's way. The only thing the lecturers were in harm's way of was a book falling on them, I guess. So I'm sympathetic, but I don't think they're my first priority by any means. Going back to the point, though, that unionization and then that culture, right? You're a lecturer, you want more money. Or you're a lecturer, you want a promotion, you want to be a bigger part. You're not going to put your head out on the line. You're not going to say, I believe in free speech and I'm a Tory. And lo and behold, I think immigration should be lowered, not higher. Or any of the other dangerous things. I think there's two genders. Oh, no, God, you're not going to say anything like that, are you? You're not going to put your head above the precipice. It's your job on the line. At least with students, yeah, it's hard. They're not fighting for a job. But then there's the student population. I think what we're seeing in today's world, where the economy is struggling so much, is honestly, working class students are finding it hard to get to university, even though there are loads of places at university. And when they are going, they're going and they're ending up doing rubbish degrees that actually saddle them in debt. So universities are becoming a place where the people that actually go there and at least have enough money to socialise and get involved in the aspects of the university life are predominantly middle class. And as a result, what we've seen is a change in politics in the last 30 years. 30 years ago, if you were young and middle class, you probably leant right. Today, you're right off to the left because the topics you talk about are not the economy, where yes, probably do believe in lowering inflation so you can buy more goods. They're social politics. You believe that women aren't paid enough. You believe that there's somehow an epidemic of trying to take away abortion rights in this country, which is just not an issue in this country. I mean, it is an issue in the US, but it's not an issue here. You believe that there are 600 genders, and you believe that there's massive discrimination in society, and that discrimination is based on your look. In the other words, that because I'm white, I might be racist. Not that there aren't racist people out there, but inherently I'm racist. Critical race theory, for example, that's taught at university. You have all these social views that push you to the left. And I just think that's creating culture where right-wing people have absolutely no chance to speak their mind.
Yeah. I feel bad for having to stop the discussion here, but it has been absolutely amazing.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.